This is Boris Berezovsky. He was the only child of a factory worker and a nurse. Not exactly billionaire material. Early on, he began importing computer software and cars back when the Soviet Union was still around. Just regular small-time businessman type stuff. But there was one thing that separated Boris from all the other wannabe billionaires. He was close friends with the chief of staff of Russian President Boris Yeltsin. And that was all he needed to get himself appointed as the head of massive Russian businesses like the airline Aeroflot, the auto manufacturer Avtoras, the oil company Sivneft, and a TV channel, Channel 1 Russia. That TV channel would come in very handy, because once Putin was running for president, Boris used his TV channel to get himself deeper into Putin's good graces. He made fun of Putin's rivals on air and publicized fake reports to make Putin look good. Putin became president, and it seemed like Boris Berezovsky had nowhere to go but up. But then out of nowhere, he turned on Putin and started talking trash about the new president's policies. He became a huge critic of Putin. No one knows exactly why he flipped on Putin, but he did. He even said that capitalists should interfere with Russia's political process. And surprise, surprise, almost immediately, Berezovsky found himself under investigation for fraud. Not long after, Berezovsky fled to London to live in exile. The Russian government took over his television assets, and years later in March 2013, he was found dead, apparently by suicide.
Mystery involving two governments and a Russian oligarch. The victim is this man, Boris Berezovsky.
The exiled Russian tycoon Boris Berezovsky has been found dead at his Surrey home.
According to Putin's spokesperson, Berezovsky has sent Putin a letter before he died, asking for forgiveness and permission to return to Russia. Pretty convenient, right? Putin's #1 critic dies by suicide, but not before apologizing for everything he's done and begging to come back home. A post-mortem exam concluded that it was indeed suicide, but then just 2 days later, thanks to conflicting evidence, the coroner went back on his conclusion and left his death as an open verdict, meaning that his death does look suspicious, but there's not enough evidence to determine if it was a suicide or if he was suicided. After Boris died, another oligarch was quick to take his place, Roman Abramovich, the owner of the Chelsea soccer club. After Berezovsky was sent into exile, Roman took over almost all of his businesses. And unlike his predecessor, Roman never dared criticize Putin, and it served him well. Today, he's worth over $13 billion, while his predecessor is in exile. Being a Russian oligarch doesn't mean you sway Putin. It doesn't mean you control the Russian government, at least not anymore. Being a Russian oligarch means complete loyalty to Putin. Not because they believe in their great leader, but because Putin has the guns, Putin has the soldiers, Putin has the assassins, and poison. One wrong move and they could be sent to prison, lose their empires, get exiled, suicided, or a combination of the above. Back before the fall of the Soviet Union in 1991, there were very few rich Russians, and even the rich guys weren't exactly that rich. But with the fall of the Soviet Union, suddenly came a chance to make a lot of money. You see, in the Soviet Union, all energy, industrial, and financial industries were owned by the government. By the time Boris Yeltsin became president of Russia, that amounted to 45,000 businesses owned by the states. Now with communism technically over, those businesses had to privatize, meaning that the government had to give up control of those businesses over to private individuals. But there was a problem. Back in the day, some of the richest Russians belonged to the Russian mob. If Yeltsin put all those businesses on the open markets, the mob would sweep everything up, and Russia's new economy would be controlled by the mob. So instead, they came up with a plan. The Russian government would create share vouchers that would be handed out equally among the population. These share vouchers could be used to buy a stake in any business on sale. Basically a piece of paper that gave you the option to buy shares in a company. But Yeltsin overlooked one problem. Most Russians were poor, starving, and when you're poor, the last thing you're thinking about is, I should be making long-term investments. No, all you're worried about is getting money now for your next meal. Poor Russians didn't care about shares in the company when they could have money now. And that's exactly what the richer Russians offered them. Money now in exchange for their share vouchers. So millions of Russians sold their vouchers to a small group of Russian men who used those vouchers to sweep up all those 45,000 businesses at fire sale prices, many of which would become billionaires in the process. By the time regular Russians figured it out, a group of around 10 men controlled 70% of the country's finances. People were livid, they had been tricked. Not only were these guys filthy rich now, but they now controlled the entire economy. They controlled all the businesses that made everything, which gave them a lot of influence and power over the president of Russia, Yeltsin. These men would become known as Russia's oligarchs. And for a while, it looked like their power and influence was unmatched. But then a new person came into power under very suspicious circumstances, a man named Vladimir Putin, and he swore to purge the oligarchy from the Kremlin.
Вы подписали этот договор?
Да.
Договор.
On July 28, 2000, Putin gathered the top 20 oligarchs and made it clear to them that they had no more political influence. Putin would let these oligarchs keep their companies and their money, but only if they stayed loyal to him, and the people ate it up. Putin would be the one to choose who became rich and who lost everything. So he started putting his friends, high-ranking military officers, and key government officials in charge of all of Russia's biggest businesses. One of Putin's picks was Arkady Rutenberg. Today, Arkady is the leader of the biggest gas pipeline and electrical power construction company in Russia. His net worth is around $3 billion. And he's been the target of sanctions more than just once, just for how close he is to Putin. So who is Arkady Rutenberg? A business graduate, a military leader, a minister? Nope, Arkady is Putin's ex-judo coach and partner. They're childhood friends. Arkady was handpicked to become a billionaire just because he was friends with Putin, and rumor has it they still train to this day. With Putin in power, the rules of the game had changed. No longer was it the oligarchs telling the government what to do, it was Putin telling them what to do at the point of a gun.
Вы подписали этот договор?
Да.
Олег Владимирович подписал? Что я не вижу вашей подписи? Идите, подпишите. Идите ко мне. Да, договор.
But one oligarch didn't like that and decided to fight back. Boy, was that a mistake. In 2003, Mikhail Khodorkovsky was Russia's richest man. His net worth stood at an estimated $15 billion. Mikhail was the head of the Yukos oil company and was the top oligarch in Russia. But there was a problem. You see, Mikhail thought, as the wealthiest man in Russia, he has some leverage over Putin. Putin couldn't just kill or arrest the richest man in the country, right? And Mikhail didn't really like all these new rules Putin was forcing the oligarchs to follow. So he thought, as top oligarch, it was his duty to stand up and say something. Big mistake. In February 2003, Mikhail did something that no oligarch had ever dreamed of doing. He took Putin on, face-to-face and in public. His main target? Government corruption. The same corruption that let Putin pick who took over businesses and who made the most money. Mikhail had poked the bear. He had embarrassed Putin in public.
Если вы посмотрите на следующий слайд, то масштабы коррупции в России в районе 30 миллиардов оценивается долларов. Это 10-12% ВВП. Причем вопрос конкретно идет о коррупции государственных чиновников.
And now he was gonna face the consequences. Soon after the meeting, Mikhail's business partner was arrested. Then his oil companies had a security. But Mikhail wouldn't give up. Instead of respecting the warning Putin was sending him, he just kept speaking out louder and louder. So on October 25, 2003, Mikhail Khodorkovsky was arrested. He was sentenced to 9 years in Moscow's most notorious prison, Matryoshkaya Tishina. And even then, he still wouldn't shut up. He kept trying to drum up popular support. So then he got sent to a labor camp. Russia's richest man now worked in a factory making mittens. In less than 2 years, he lost it all. His company, his money, his freedom. And by 2013, Mikhail finally got out. Today, he lives in exile in Switzerland. After Mikhail's fall from grace, it was clear that a new unspoken rule emerged, and the message was clear. You stay out of my politics, and I won't throw you in prison, destroy your company, and take your wealth. And that message stands true to this day. Mikhail Lysin was a Russian media icon. He was also on great terms with Vladimir Putin. Such great terms that he actually served as his press secretary. Lysin was also the founder of Russia Today, or RT, a Russian news channel you've probably seen on YouTube. He wanted to turn RT into Moscow's version of CNN. And for 6 years, things went great. He ran the network, he spread the propaganda, he kept Putin happy, and he got filthy rich in the process. But then Leeson started getting a little too comfortable. He started enjoying Western life a little too much. Leeson owned millions of dollars worth of real estate in America. His wife and kids lived and worked in the US. How could the owner of the Russian TV news network be seen flaunting the American dream, living it up in California, and becoming more and more westernized? Worse yet, what if those Western ideals started seeping into their news network? The Kremlin decided that he needed to be toned down a notch. What sort of message would it send if the guy who's supposed to be telling people how bad America is suddenly decides to make America his permanent home? And it didn't help much that the Kremlin started suspecting he was working with the FBI. In 2011, those fears came true. Mikhail Leeson moved to Beverly Hills permanently. A little later, he resigned from most of his positions in Russia. The Kremlin just couldn't look past it. Their #1 propagandist had taken it too far. So Mikhail Leeson was found dead in a Washington hotel on November 5, 2015. At first, they said it was a heart attack. Then they said alcohol poisoning. A few days later, it was death by blunt force trauma. He had gotten drunk and fallen down. The problem was people kept coming out with more information. The hyoid bone in Leeson's neck was broken, an injury not consistent with a simple fall. He was likely strangled. Then a little later, another report was released saying that there was evidence of trauma on his upper and lower extremities. Classic signs of someone who was beaten to death. But it didn't matter. The official verdict was death by accident. To the other oligarchs, it was yet another warning. No matter where you are in the world, don't get too comfortable. Then there's Vladimir Guzinski, Putin's most hated oligarch. Just like everyone else on the list, Guzinski made his billions after the fall of the Soviet Union. The only difference was, he made his money on his own, not from buying out Russian businesses. After failing at almost everything in life, including university and the military, Guzinski joined Gaidas, a theater school. To make money, he drove a taxi and traded on the black markets. In 1987, with just $1,000, he started the first state-approved women's clothing company, and from there he went nowhere but up. And then, thanks to his theater background, he turned his company into a media corporation called Media Most. He played his political cards right with Yeltsin, and after the president's re-election, he was rewarded the country's first private TV network, NTV. Guzinski has always been critical of Yeltsin's governments, but he knew when to suck up, and it served him well. As soon as he got his TV network, he went back to criticizing everything Yeltsin did. Being a weaker leader, Yeltsin did nothing to make him stop. But then Putin became president, and things started changing fast. Guzinski had been sympathizing with Putin's opposition, so one of Putin's first acts as president was to launch an investigation against Guzinski and put NTV back under government control. In June 2000, Guzinski was arrested on unrelated charges and jailed in the infamous Byaturka prison. This place is terrifying. The prison is overcrowded and overheated, and because of this, epidemics in the jail are a huge issue, so officers group prisoners in cells according to sickness. A cell for tuberculosis, a cell for AIDS, a cell for users of a specific drug. Guzinski definitely didn't fit in. He was just a regular businessman. He would have been eaten alive. Thankfully, after public outcry, he was released 3 days later into house arrest. A few weeks later, he agreed to sell all his media assets for $300 million and left Russia forever. He wasn't gonna risk another prison sentence. Not for all the freedom of speech in the world.
Verwaltungsrechtliche Schritt, damit jetzt keine Zertifizierung der Pipeline erfolgen kann. Und ohne diese Zertifizierung kann Nord Stream 2 ja nicht in Betrieb gehen.
Remember this guy, Arkady Rottenberg, Putin's old judo partner, who became the head of the biggest gas pipeline and electrical power construction company in Russia? Well, his construction company was responsible for building the Nord Stream 2 pipeline, a pipeline that would carry natural gas from Russia to Germany. The pipeline alone cost $11 billion to construct. And even though it was completed in September 2021, Arkady's company was still waiting for the 50% share Western energy companies were supposed to pay. But then Putin invaded Ukraine, and the pipeline was cancelled. Putin and Arkady were childhood friends. They grew up together. This deal would have made Arkady insanely rich, even way richer than he is right now. Now come on, Putin must have known what would happen to Arkady's biggest moneymaker if he invaded Ukraine. But Putin invaded anyways, without a second thought as to how this would affect his childhood friend. Now Arkady stands to lose billions of dollars, and this really epitomizes the relationship between Russia's oligarchs and Putin. No matter how rich, how influential, how indispensable they may think they are, they will always be Putin's female dogs. What's up guys, hope you enjoyed the video. I am really happy with how this one came out. If you're new here, we make documentaries just like this one on money, power, and crime. So if you like this one, you should definitely subscribe and consider clicking the join button below for more documentaries just like this one that are longer and too controversial to be released to the public. Anyways, that's gonna wrap it up. You can follow me on Instagram at jaketran.io. Stay dangerous out there, and I will see you guys in the next one.